My name is Steve Jacobson. I was born in Fort Worth, Texas, and raised on a farm in Franklin, Tennessee. During high school and college, I took flying lessons and also joined the Naval ROTC program while majoring in mechanical engineering at Vanderbilt University. After graduation, I received my commission as an ensign in the U.S. Navy with orders to flight training at NAS Pensacola, Florida in February 1967. I spent the next 18 months training in the T-34, T-2, and F-9 at Pensacola, Meridian, Mississippi, and Kingsville, Texas. After being designated a naval aviator in July 1968, I had a short assignment training in the TA-4F at NAS Miramar, California, and was selected to be a fleet replacement pilot in the A-7 Corsair II at NAS Lemoore, California. Following completion of A-7 training and carrier qualification, I received orders to attack Squadron 215 and deployed with Air Wing 6 aboard the USS Roosevelt and in the Mediterranean Sea in 1970. In 1971, the squadron was assigned to Air Wing 19 aboard the USS Oriskany and deployed to Southeast Asia for combat operations in the Tonkin Gulf off the coast of Vietnam and flew 64 combat missions. The following videos and still photographs were from 8mm movies and 35mm slides made during 1970 and 1971. This is a view from the flight deck of the attack carrier USS Franklin D. Roosevelt, CVA-42. The ship departed Naval Station Mayport, Florida in January 1970 to relieve the USS Independence, CVA-62, on station in the Mediterranean Sea. The Roosevelt is leaving the North Atlantic and approaching the Straits of Gibraltar, where it will rendezvous with the Independence to have a turnover debrief before the Independence continues back to its home port in the United States. The seas in the North Atlantic are very rough in the winter, with waves periodically breaking over the bow of the carrier, which is 65 feet above the waterline. When the ship is pitching severely and experiencing heavy rolls, as many airplanes as will fit on the hangar deck are moved below and secured with extra tie-down chains. The Roosevelt was designed for World War II propeller airplanes, so a large number of the jets aboard the ship will not fit in the hangar and must remain on the flight deck in the heavy weather. These planes are parked as far aft as possible on the flight deck to reduce their exposure to the heavy seas breaking over the bow. The destroyer on the horizon escorting the carrier is getting a severe beating by the waves and taking green water on the bridge. As the ship approaches the coast of Spain and the Straits of Gibraltar, the heavy seas are calming down. The destroyer visible at anchor is the USS Harwood DD-861. This post-World War II destroyer made several deployments to the Mediterranean from the 1940s through the 1960s, participated in the Cuban Missile Crisis, and saw combat support missions in Vietnam. After returning from Vietnam, it was transferred to the Turkish Navy, where it was accidentally sunk by friendly fire. The small civilian yacht cruising close to the carrier has local sightseers looking at the two big carriers anchored in the straits. Today, this would be considered a serious threat, and they would not be allowed to get that close to our ships. The supercarrier with the number 62 on the island is the Independence. This A-7 154-454 is really not an RA-7B. It's just a plain old garden variety A-7B, but with a little sense of humor, my troops painted the R designation, which signifies a reconnaissance aircraft. I flew several missions with this plane, taking pictures with motorized handheld Nikon 35mm cameras when the photo reconnaissance RF-8s weren't available. The next picture shows a couple of A-3s and an RA-5 Vigilante photo reconnaissance airplane aboard the carrier Ranger. This was taken during carrier qualifications off San Diego. While anchored in the straits, some of the off-duty personnel are relaxing in the sunshine before the ship gets underway to proceed on station. When the USS Roosevelt returned from deployment in the Mediterranean to Naval Station Mayport, Florida in July 1970, The VA-215 Barnells flew their A-7B Corsair IIs from Florida back to their home base at Naval Air Station Lemoore, California. This is part of their homecoming fly-in. Number 401 is Commander Bill Beck, the Barnell skipper, call sign Hoot 1. The pilot of 407 is Lieutenant Jim Mason. In the center of the group is Commander Beck and his family. After the returning pilots park their airplanes, it is traditional that they are given a welcome home beverage before they get out of the cockpit. After my brake turned to the downwind leg for landing, I had a PC-2 hydraulic system failure when I extended the landing gear and the flaps, so I had to use the emergency hydraulic accumulators to extend the landing gear and flaps and stop the airplane with the emergency air brakes. The main system brakes and nose wheel steering are inoperative with a PC-2 failure, so I had to park the airplane in the middle of the runway and be towed to the hangar parking area of the ground support tractor. After flying from the East Coast to the West Coast for our homecoming, I traveled the last 2 miles home behind a yellow tug. This is Jack Pascal being greeted by his wife and children. The pilot in the orange hat is Pat Weary and his wife Leslie and their son. The man in the white shirt is Commander Don McConnell, the former commanding officer of the VA-215 Barnells. Next is Lieutenant Ray By. And here's Lieutenant Matt Wathen, alias the Wasp, with beverage in hand and a big smile on his face. This VA-215 A-7B is flying over Lake Tahoe. During the training cycle prior to deployment, the squadron flew training missions to Naval Air Station Fallon, Nevada Target Complex. Fallon is about 80 miles east of Lake Tahoe in Reno, Nevada. This is a low-level navigation flight simulating a nuclear weapons delivery mission. It is usually flown at 6 miles per minute ground speed and below 200 feet to avoid enemy radar. The runway coming up is runway 32 right at Naval Air Station Lemoore. The orange light on the left is the meatball on the Fresnel lens optical landing system. It is mounted next to a simulated carrier deck landing area painted on the runway. The silver airplanes are U.S. Air Force T-37 jet trainers that were used from 1956 until they were retired in 2009. This is an aerial view of the town of Lemoore, California, taken from a light airplane. Most of the pilots based at Naval Air Station Lemoore who did not have quarters on base lived in this small farming town, or Hanford, the next small town to the east. 88 Lemoore-based pilots were classified as prisoners of war or missing in action. Of those, 43 were POWs released in 1973, including Senator John McCain. This is where they lived. After returning from the Mediterranean in 1970, VA-215 was reassigned from Air Wing 6 aboard the USS Roosevelt to Air Wing 19 on the USS Oriskany, CVA-34. The Air Wing tail letters and call sign changed from Alpha Echo to November Mike, as shown on the vertical stabilizer. After the Vietnam War was over, this airplane, November Mike 406, bureau number 154-458, was returned to the Vought factory in Grand Prairie, Texas, and converted into a two-seat TA-7 Charlie. Its last assignment was with VX-5 at Naval Air Station China Lake, California, where it was used for weapons testing and development. The snow-covered peaks in the background are the Sierra Nevada mountains in California. This airplane is a Douglas A-3 Sky Warrior. This particular airplane is one that was used to train flight crews and does not have ECM equipment aboard. The A-3 was the longest-serving carrier-based aircraft in history and was operational from 1956 until 1991. It was also the heaviest, with a maximum takeoff weight of 82,000 pounds. The bridge just off the end of Naval Air Station Alameda's runway 31 is the San Francisco-Oakland Bay Bridge. If an A-3 lost an engine just after liftoff, the standard procedure was to go under the bridge because it could not get over the bridge on one engine. On May 1, 1971, the USS Oriskany departed its home port at NAS Alameda for a 7-month deployment to the Western Pacific in combat operations in the Tonkin Gulf off the coast of Vietnam. The people on the pier are family and friends who have come to bid the crew farewell and watch the ship leave the harbor. The channel leading to the carrier piers is quite narrow, with only a few feet of clearance between the bottom and the keel of the carriers and other deep-draft ships. For this reason, tugboats are needed to assist the carrier until it moves away from the piers into the main channel and deeper water. The runway visible beyond the seawall is runway 31 at NAS Alameda. The green datum lights and the orange meatball on the optical landing system are visible on the left side of the runway landing zone. This is the bow of the Oriskany lining up to pass under the San Francisco-Oakland Bay Bridge. The buildings on the left are in downtown San Francisco. Parallel lines on the flight deck to the right side of the bow are part of the starboard steam catapult used to launch aircraft. The orange checkerboard square painted on the deck outlines the forward elevator, which is used to move airplanes between the flight deck and the hangar deck below. There's not very much vertical clearance between the bridge's roadway and the antennas on the ship's masthead. The small island with the lighthouse is Alcatraz, a former military and federal prison that was closed in 1963. It is now a tourist attraction operated by the National Park Service. This is a Japanese container ship leaving the port of Oakland and heading toward the Golden Gate Bridge. The island in the background is Angel Island, which was the West Coast counterpart of New York's Ellis Island, where immigrants were processed on arrival in the United States. Several of the A-7s and F-8s are visible on the flight deck as the Oriskany passes under the Golden Gate Bridge and sets course for a brief stop in Pearl Harbor en route to Subic Bay in the Philippines and on to Vietnam. This is a picture of the Oriskany's aft flight deck area, the landing area. It was taken from a helicopter, the plane guard helicopter that follows the ship around in case someone falls overboard or has to eject from an airplane. Then the plane guard helicopter picks them up out of the water. This sequence is the Oriskany launching aircraft. The side view shows an F-8 and an A-7 preparing to launch from the port and starboard catapults. The large prop airplane is a C-2 Greyhound carrier onboard delivery aircraft, better known as the COD. It's used for cargo flights to the ship. After the launch is complete, the landing aircraft are trapped aboard the angled deck and parked on the bow until being moved aft for the next launch. This is a view of Hong Kong Harbor between the cities of Hong Kong and Kowloon. The U.S. Navy aircraft carriers anchored out in the middle of the harbor, and the crews used water taxis called Walla Wallas to travel between the ship and shore. The large double-ended ferry boat is the famous Star Ferry that runs between Hong Kong and Kowloon. The old Hong Kong International Airport, Kai Tak, was located on the water near the tall buildings in Kowloon until it was closed in 1998 and moved away from the city. At the northern end of the old runway, the buildings rose up to 6 stories just across the road. The other 3 sides of the runway were surrounded by Victoria Harbor. The low-altitude maneuver required to line up with the runway was so spectacular that some passengers claimed to have glimpsed at the flickering televisions through the apartment windows on the final approach. The mountains and coastline below the A-7 are in the Philippines near Subic Bay. The small rocks offshore were used for bombing practice by the Navy and Marine Corps. This 4-plane formation of VA-215 A-7s is holding over the Oriskany in the Delta pattern, waiting for the signal Charlie. This is the signal to drop your tailhook and descend for landing aboard the ship. This is the Mekong River in southern Laos, known operationally as the Steel Tiger area. At this point, the river forms the border between Laos and Thailand. The Ho Chi Minh Trail was a large system of roads and trails that ran from North Vietnam to South Vietnam through the neighboring kingdoms of Laos and Cambodia. The system provided support in the form of manpower and supplies to the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese Army during the war. Most of the traffic passed from North Vietnam to Laos through 3 main passes on the border, Nape, Magia, and Ban Karai. This is a typical picture of the tens of thousands of bomb craters that cover these pass areas. The white puffs of smoke are from the forward air controllers, white phosphorus rockets marking the targets, and the flashes with gray smoke are the bombs dropped by the jets. This Navy A-3 tanker is taking off from Da Nang Air Force Base in South Vietnam, just below the demilitarized zone. The next sequence is a formation of 2 A-3s and an F-8 preparing to refuel in flight. This A-7B is November Delta 411, flying over the walled city of Hue and its citadel in South Vietnam. The airplane, which had my name on it, suffered an engine failure over the Tonkin Gulf on September 22, 1971, while being flown by another pilot. The pilot ejected and was rescued by a helicopter from the USS Roosevelt. The smoke on the water looks like a really bad shipboard fire, but it's just the plane guard destroyer blowing steam on the boiler tubes to clean off the soot. The prop plane with the radome on top launching from the catapult is a Grumman E-1B tracker early warning radar plane. The small prop airplane with its wings folded is a C-1A carrier onboard delivery airplane. It was the predecessor to the larger C-2A cod that was shown earlier. The single-engine prop airplane is a Douglas A-1 Skyraider known as the SPAD. These planes were attack bombers that served in both the Korean War and the Vietnam War. These are VA-215 Barnell A-7Bs launching for a bombing strike on the Ho Chi Minh Trail in Laos. The airplane with its wings still folded is a VA-155 Silver Fox A-7B loaded with 12 Mark 82 500-pound bombs. This VF-191 F-8 Crusader number 101 is carrying a Sidewinder missile on a rail aft of the star. The 20mm gun ports are visible forward of the star. The crews in the red shirts are Ordnance technicians putting the fuses in the bombs and arming the bomb racks. This RF-8G side number 601 is a photo recon version of the F-8 Crusader. It doesn't carry guns or missiles, but it has side-looking cameras in the square windows below the star and a forward-looking camera under the cockpit. The Bluetail A-7 from VA-153 is being moved from the hangar deck to the flight deck on the number 2 elevator, which is in the forward part of the landing area on the Essex-class carriers. For safety reasons, the bombs are not fused until the aircraft reaches the flight deck. The ordnance men in the red shirts are installing the fuses. This VA-155 A-7B had a main landing gear strut collapse during landing. It is being removed by Tilly, the flight deck emergency crane. The Oriskany is making a turn into the wind, preparing to launch for the next strike. The A-7s parked in the landing area are loaded with bombs and are starting engines for the launch. On the smaller deck Essex-class carriers, the catapult stroke is only slightly over 200 feet. In order to accelerate an A-7 fully loaded with fuel and bombs to flying speed, the catapult has to achieve an end speed of about 165 knots, which is about 185 miles per hour. This slams the pilot against the seat until the airplane is completely off the bow. As the aircraft taxi forward to the catapult, they stop behind a large water-cooled blast deflector called the JBD until the airplane on the catapult is launched. Since the airplane on the catapult is at full power, it is necessary to protect the airplanes and the flight deck personnel behind it from the hot jet exhaust blast. This is a formation of A-7s flying with Loran-equipped F-4s from the Air Force. The Loran F-4 flight leader acts as a high-altitude bombing pathfinder during bad weather, and the whole formation drops all their weapons at the same time on command from the F-4. The bad news is that this delivery method requires a level flight delivery and only small heading corrections during the last 20 miles approaching the target, which makes the whole formation a sitting duck for the enemy gunners. The walled city of Hue is again visible on the way back to the ship. If you look closely at the top of the fuselage on this Loran-equipped F-4, you can see the Loran antenna, which looks like a clothesline mounted between the canopy and the vertical stabilizer. This sequence is taken from aft of the island looking forward toward the starboard catapult. The yellow structure is Tilly, the mobile flight deck crane. The jet blast deflectors are in front of the A-7 that is unfolding its wings, and as soon as the catapult is launched, the blast deflectors will drop flat on the deck and the next airplane will taxi into position on the catapult. The blast deflectors are only a few feet behind the jet engine exhaust with the engine at full power for the launch, so they are water cooled to prevent damage to the structure and hydraulic actuators. The A-3 going around on a missed approach has been waved off by the landing signal officer and will make another pass to land. The next airplane landing after that is an F-8. Here's another picture of the bomb craters where a segment of the Ho Chi Minh Trail crosses a river. The A-3 is unfolding its wings on the angled deck before moving forward to the port catapult for launch. With its 72.5-foot wingspan, the A-3 was the largest airplane on the ship. On the rare occasions that required it to be moved to the hangar deck, the vertical stabilizer and the rudder had to be folded down parallel to the horizontal stabilizer before it could be moved below on the elevator. The A-7 tanker on the starboard catapult has a D-704 in-flight refueling package under the left wing and two Aero 1D external fuel tanks under the right wing. With 10,000 pounds of internal fuel and 6,000 pounds in the external tanks, the A-7 could carry more giveaway fuel than the A-3 tanker. Looking aft from Vulture's Row catwalk on the port side of the island, the tinted blue glass windows are on the primary flight control tower known as Pryfly, where the air boss controls the flight deck operations. The clear glass window below Pryfly is the location of one of the flight deck video camera stations that records all activity on the flight deck. The signalman with the flags is on the signal bridge, which is used for communications between ships during radio silence. This is a Navy fleet oiler, the USS Guadalupe AO-32, alongside the USS Oriskany conducting underway replenishment. It's refueling the carrier with both black oil for the ship's boilers and jet fuel for the airplanes. The plane guard destroyer is in close formation on the other side of the carrier, taking on fuel from the Oriskany. The standard operating procedure at the time was to keep the ship's fuel to 90% capacity, which required refueling from the oiler about every 3 days. The sea state was pretty rough during this refueling, which makes for some exciting moments on all the ships involved during this close formation maneuver, which sometimes lasted over 3 hours. And here's another destroyer alongside bumming fuel from the carrier. The A-7s are loaded up with bombs for a large strike involving most of the Oriskany's air wing. The sailors in the brown shirts are plane captains who stay with their individual airplane anytime it is on deck during flight operations. November Delta 404 has 4 1,000-pound Mark 83 bombs loaded on the parent racks. This load has less drag than the usual 12 500-pound Mark 82 bombs on multiple racks, which is nice against targets in a very high threat area. In combat, speed is life and more is better. The yellow tractor with the red tank is a low-profile firefighting unit that can fit in tight spaces between the airplanes. The big yellow fire truck on the left is the crash crew's primary mobile firefighting equipment, and it's always stationed on the flight deck. Watch the F-8s when they light the afterburner just before the catapult shot. The afterburner gives them the extra thrust needed by a fighter on takeoff and also makes it possible to fly at supersonic speeds. It's pretty spectacular at night when the flames extend several feet behind the airplane. Unfortunately, the A-7 did not have an afterburner, but we got better gas mileage than the fighters. This sequence shows A-7s and F-8s launching from both of the Oriskany's catapults. USS Oriskany was the 17th Essex-class aircraft carrier and the first of 9 carriers to be converted from the World War II straight deck to an angled deck suitable for the Navy's new jet aircraft in the 1950s. Although the Oriskany was fitted with the first angled deck in U.S. Navy, it did not have the 2 additional waist catapults installed in the angle that would later become standard on the supercarriers, starting with the USS Forrestal CVA-59. The Oriskany was launched in October of 1945, but because the war had ended, it was put into storage and not commissioned until September 1950. The ship launched combat strikes in both the Korean War and the Vietnam War and served on active duty until it was decommissioned in September 1975. After several years in storage with the reserve fleet, it was sunk as an artificial reef in May 2006, making the Oriskany the largest ship ever sunk for this purpose. The Oriskany is located 24 miles south of Pensacola, Florida, in approximately 212 feet of water and it's open to divers. Here's my old airplane again, Barnell 411, before its untimely demise and trip to the bottom of the Tonkin Gulf. This helicopter is a Cammon UH-2C on plane guard duty. Its primary mission is being airborne during all flight operations and on station near the ship for search and rescue if needed. After completing night carrier qualification in the A-7 aboard the USS Constellation, CVA-64, I was standing by for a passenger seat on one of these helicopters to fly back to San Diego. At the last minute, I was bumped by the ship's senior medical officer, a Navy captain. That helicopter crashed 7 miles off the coast on the way to Naval Air Station North Island. There were no survivors. After that, I never complained about being bumped from any passenger flights. The sailor in the green shirt holding the black box with the numbers is verifying the airplane's launch weight with the pilot to make sure the catapult is set for the correct weight before the catapult is fired. The crews in yellow shirts are flight deck taxi directors who help guide the airplanes moving around the flight deck. This helicopter is a U.S. Army AH-1G from the 16th Air Cavalry based at Canton in the Mekong Delta. It is armed with two 19-shot 2.75-inch rocket pods with anti-personnel rockets, a 7.62 millimeter minigun, and a 40 millimeter grenade launcher. It's firing rockets at the bad guys hiding in the tree lines around the rice paddies. Here's the door gunner in a Navy CH-46. These helicopters were used to move troops and supplies to remote fire bases in South Vietnam. The Navy OV-10 is from the Val-4 Black Ponies, based in Ben Tui in the Mekong Delta. Its primary weapons were pods of 5-inch Zuni rockets and 4 7.62 millimeter machine guns. This is a flight of two Val-4 OV-10s flying armed reconnaissance at low level along the Mekong River during the monsoon season. The floodwaters in the delta create choke points that restricted the Viet Cong troop movements to higher ground, which made them easier to track from the air. An Army controller on the ground is directing the OV-10s in a strike on the enemy troops in the thick jungle near a canal. This is more low-level recce in an OV-10 along the Mekong River. This is a sequence of rocket attacks on Viet Cong troops that are hiding out during the day and waiting to attack at night. The olive drab jets are South Vietnamese Air Force AT-37s at Vinh Tui. The AT-37 was an armed version of the U.S. Air Force's T-37 basic jet trainer. The weapons under the next OV-10 are cluster bombs containing canisters of fuel-air explosives known as FAEs. They were used against enemy troop concentrations near the Cambodian border. FAEs are high-velocity overpressure bombs that are more effective in dense jungle canopy than iron bombs and rockets. It's an ugly weapon designed to rupture eardrums and eyeballs with a high-pressure shock wave instead of spreading shrapnel. Here's some more rocket and strafing runs followed by an approach and landing at Vinh Tui. These pictures were taken from the front seat of an Army AH-1G Huey Cobra attack helicopter on an armed recce mission along the Mekong River and neighboring rice paddies. The white box with wings is the Short Brothers Skyvan at Ben Tui, flown by a mystery crew on an undisclosed mission. The white Dornier aircraft with twin-pod engines and a United States civilian registration number is a CIA airplane. The airplane getting a wash job is a US-2B anti-submarine warfare plane. Not sure where this picture was taken. It appears to be an RA-5C Vigilante on the ramp out behind it. The yellow chain that's down there in front of the fire extinguishers on the ground next to the grass is anchor chain, and that was typically used alongside the runways for arresting gear for jet airplanes that had some type of emergency and either an abort situation or had to make an arrested landing for hydraulic failure. The chain would be laid out for several hundred feet on each side, and as the wire was caught with a tail hook, the farther you went, the more chain you picked up until you stopped. The orange and white airplane with the twin recips is a World War II vintage F-7F Grumman Tiger Cat. The California Department of Forestry used a bunch of those airplanes as fire bombers. Notice the large bore-8 bomb bay on the bottom of the airplane. This particular one was stationed at Porterville, California, at the California Department of Forestry's fire base there. The Ling Temco Vought A-7 was one of the world's most cost-effective and capable light attack aircraft ever flown. Although derived from Vaught's legendary F-8 Crusader, the A-7 is a completely different aircraft. Limiting speed to below Mach 1 and eliminating other features dramatically reduced the structural weight and cost. This allowed the A-7 to carry 3 times the Crusader's weapon load and deliver it extremely efficiently with unprecedented accuracy. In February 1967, LTV won the Navy's design competition for the aircraft to replace the Douglas A-4 Skyhawk. Since LTV used a tried and tested airframe and engine, the A-7A prototype made its first flight in September 1965, only 19 months after the contract was awarded. The Navy was wary from previous experience with contractors incurring huge cost overruns and delays during development and imposed strict penalties on any conditions that could not be met. As a result, the A-7 contract was the only true fixed-price contract ever issued for a major weapons system. Each A-7 cost a little over $1 million, which was an impressive bargain even in the 1960s. The first combat-ready A-7As were delivered to Attack Squadron 147 in the last quarter of 1967 and flew their first combat missions on December 4, 1967, only 2 years and 3 months after the A-7 prototype's first flight. The U.S. Navy's A-7s continued to serve from aircraft carriers around the world until they were retired in May of 1991. After being replaced in the U.S. Navy by the F-18 Hornet, A-7s still continued to serve with foreign governments until the Greek Air Force retired their last A-7s in October of 2014. 49 years of active service is a remarkable record for a combat aircraft.